nobody wanted this game. Not the players, not the coaches, not even the two men in the dugouts who spent the week before it telling anyone who would listen that the fixture should not exist. Two of the biggest football nations on the planet dragged onto a pitch in the Miami Heat to play a match neither of them had any interest in playing. A consolation, a leftover, the game you get when the game you wanted is gone. And it produced 10 goals. 10. In one match. The most goals scored in a single World Cup game in over 40 years. A 4-goal lead that evaporated. A hat trick. A record broken that had stood for the better part of 2 decades. A farewell that turned into a public unraveling. And a final scoreline so absurd that broadcasters were openly laughing on air because there was simply no other way to process what they had just watched. In this video, we break down exactly what happened when France met England in the third-place playoff at the 2026 World Cup. The tactical decisions that lit the fuse. The collapse that should never have happened, the comeback that nearly did. And the controversies that turned a meaningless bronze medal match into one of the most talked about games of the entire tournament. Because by the time we get to the end of this one, you will understand why a game that both managers wanted canceled ended up being the game that everyone remembered. But to understand how we got here, you have to understand how both of these teams arrived in Miami with their heads down and their dreams already dead. Let us set the scene. France came into the 2026 World Cup as one of the tournament favorites, and for a while they looked every bit the part. They had Kylian Mbappé at the peak of his powers, leading the line and terrorizing defenses. They had Michael Olise pulling strings behind him, arguably the player of the tournament through the group stage and into the knockouts. They had Ousmane Dembélé, Desire Doué, a spine of world-class talent that on paper could beat anybody. They tore through their early matches. They handled Morocco in the quarterfinals. Mbappé was scoring. Olise was creating. It looked like Didier Deschamps might just guide his country to yet another final in what everyone already knew was going to be his last tournament in charge. And then they ran into Spain. The semi-final was a lesson. Spain, the reigning European champions, simply suffocated them. 2-0. France barely laid a glove on them. All of that firepower, Mbappé, Dembélé, Olise, and the Spanish defense neutralized the lot of it. The dream of a third World Cup final in a row for France was over. And the reign of Didier Deschamps, 14 years, a world title, 2 finals, was going to end not with a trophy, but with a third-place playoff nobody wanted. England, meanwhile, came into their own semi-final carrying 60 years of history on their backs. 60 years since 1966. 60 years of near misses and penalty heartbreak, and coming so close you could taste it before it was ripped away. And against Argentina, in Atlanta, they were 40 minutes from ending it. Anthony Gordon put them ahead. 1-0. England in a World Cup semi-final, leading the reigning world champions with the clock ticking down. This was it. This was the moment. And then Thomas Tuchel made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of the tournament and possibly the rest of his time in the job. He shut up shop. Instead of chasing a second goal, instead of putting the game to bed, England dropped deep. They loaded the back line. They invited pressure. They played not to lose instead of playing to win. And against a team with Lionel Messi in it, playing not to lose is an invitation to disaster. Argentina scored in the 85th minute. And then again in stoppage time. 2-0 down, became 1-0 up, became 2-1 defeat in the space of a few devastating minutes. England were out. Again. And Thomas Tuchel walked into a wall of criticism so intense that he would later say the press conference afterwards felt like they had been knocked out in the group stage without winning a single game. So that is how these two teams arrived at the third-place playoff. France, humiliated by Spain, playing out the final chapter of the Deschamps era. England gutted by Argentina, their manager under siege for the tactics that cost them a place in the final. Two wounded animals told to go and fight each other for a medal that neither of them actually wanted. And that is where the first controversy begins. Because before a ball was even kicked, both managers made it very clear how they felt about the whole thing. Thomas Tuchel came out and said it plainly. None of his players wanted to play this match. None of the French players wanted to play it either. They all wanted to be at the final in New Jersey, not sweating it out in Miami for third place. He was not hiding it. He was not dressing it up. He was telling the world that the game everybody was about to watch was, in the eyes of the people playing it, a chore. Deschamps went even further. He said the best thing for both France and England would be for this match to simply not exist. The coach of France, one of the most decorated managers in the history of the international game, standing in front of the cameras and saying out loud that he would rather the fixture were scrapped entirely. Now think about what that does. Think about the message it sends. Fans have traveled across the world. They have paid for tickets and flights and hotels. They are sitting in that stadium in the Miami heat, expecting to watch two of the best teams on earth. And the men in charge of those teams have spent the build-up telling everyone the game is pointless. This is the eternal argument about the third-place playoff. Some people think it is a waste of time, a fixture that serves no purpose, forcing exhausted and heartbroken players to perform in a match with nothing meaningful on the line. Others argue there is still plenty to play for. National pride, a place on the podium, an extra $2 million in prize money for the winner, ranking points, personal milestones, and, as it turned out, quite a lot of history. But the controversy was set. Two managers openly dismissing the game. And then came the team sheets. And the team sheets told two completely different stories. Because this is where the second big talking point of the night comes in. The two managers looked at the exact same fixture and made completely opposite decisions about how to approach it. And those decisions shaped everything that followed. Let us start with Deschamps. For his final match in charge of France, 14 years at the helm, the man went strong. He named a near full-strength side. Mbappé started, Olise started, Maignan in goal, Theo Hernandez, Ibrahima Konate, Adrien Rabiot. The big names were out there. This was not a coach treating the game as a formality. This was a coach who wanted to go out on a win and who wanted to give his captain every possible chance to chase down a piece of individual glory. Because Kylian Mbappé had a target in his sights. The Golden Boot, the award for the top scorer at the tournament. And going into this match, Mbappé was tied at the very top with Lionel Messi, both of them on 8 goals. Messi held the tiebreaker thanks to an extra assist, and Messi would be playing in the final the next day. So if Mbappé wanted the Golden Boot, or at least wanted to pile the pressure on, he needed goals. And Deschamps was going to make sure his captain had the platform to get them. Now look at the other bench. Thomas Tuchel, a manager under enormous pressure, a manager who had just been torn apart for his tactics. And what did he do for the third-place playoff? He rotated, heavily. Harry Kane, the captain, the talisman, dropped to the bench. Jude Bellingham, one of the best midfielders in the world, on the bench. Jordan Pickford, the #1 goalkeeper, replaced by Dean Henderson. Declan Rice was handed the captain's armband, a patchwork side full of players who had spent much of the tournament watching from the sidelines. And on the surface, that decision drew immediate attention. Because it looked to a lot of people like England were not taking the game seriously. It looked like a team going through the motions. France had loaded up, England had emptied out. And the natural assumption was that this was going to be a comfortable French victory, a nice send-off for Deschamps, a chance for Mbappé to grab his goals, and a quiet end to a disappointing tournament for the Three Lions. That assumption lasted about 2.5 minutes. Because whatever Thomas Tuchel said to that rotated, supposedly disinterested England side before kickoff, it worked. And what followed in the first 45 minutes was one of the most stunning halves of football the entire tournament produced. Declan Rice, wearing the armband, decided he was not going to wait around. Barely 2.5 minutes on the clock, and he picked the ball up in space and curled a beautiful effort from distance past Maignan. 1-0 England. Inside 3 minutes, the captain leading from the front. And France, the strong side, the full-strength send-off team, simply had no answer. It got worse for them almost immediately. England won a corner, Rice swung it in, and Ezri Konasa rose above everyone to plant a header into the net. 2-0, 18 minutes gone. The rotated, unbothered England team was tearing the French defense to shreds, and the near full-strength French side was falling apart in front of their own supporters. Then came Bukayo Saka. Saka had endured his own history with France and with big moments. This was a player who knew what pressure felt like, who had carried the weight of past disappointments, and who came into this game desperate to end the tournament on a high. And in the first half in Miami, he was unplayable. His first came from a Marcus Rashford pass, an unselfish ball across the face of goal, and Saka was there to finish it off. 3-0. And then he got his second, a brilliant strike from the edge of the box, the kind of finish that makes you forget entirely that this was supposed to be a game nobody wanted to play. 4-0. 4-0 at halftime. In a third-place playoff, England, with their captain on the bench and their best midfielder in a tracksuit, were absolutely dismantling a France side that had been sent out at close to full strength to give Didier Deschamps a fitting farewell. The French defense had been carved open again and again. Maignan had been picked out of his net 4 times, and the Deschamps era, one of the most successful in the history of French football, was staring down the barrel of a humiliating end. 4-0 down. His final match, his full-strength team, being taken apart by England's reserves. And here is where the story turns. Because if it had stayed 4-0, this would just be a story about a collapse, a story about a French embarrassment, but it did not stay 4-0. Not even close. Whatever Deschamps said at halftime, and whatever pride kicked in among those French players, the second half was a completely different match. France came out transformed, and at the heart of the transformation was Kylian Mbappé, a man with a golden boot to chase and a legend of the game to send off properly. In the 48th minute, Mbappé struck 4-1. A response, a lifeline, and crucially for him, a goal that moved him level at the top of that scoring chart. Michael Olise, having a monster of a tournament, provided the assist. Then Mbappé turned provider, teeing up Bradley Barcola, and suddenly it was 4-2. The French supporters who had been sitting in stunned silence found their voices. The game that nobody wanted was, against all odds, coming alive. And then Mbappé got his second of the night. Olise again with the assist. 4-3, a 1-goal game. And with that goal, Kylian Mbappé did something that will be talked about for a very long time. He became the all-time leading goal scorer in the history of the World Cup. Now, this is worth pausing on, because there was a little bit of confusion and debate around it in the moment, and it is worth being precise. Across his World Cup career, Mbappé pushed his total past the mark that had stood as the benchmark for the competition's greatest goal scorers. He had done it at 27 years of age, with potentially another tournament or two still ahead of him. In a game that both coaches said should not even be played, one of the sport's biggest stars had written his name at the very top of the World Cup record books. And there was another record falling in real time, one that got a little less attention, but was every bit as remarkable. Michael Olise, with his assists in this match, moved to 7 assists for the tournament. 7. The most by any single player at one World Cup on record. A staggering individual achievement and a reminder that even in the chaos, even in a match nobody wanted, history was being made on that pitch. So now we have a game. 4-3. France surging. England, the young rotated side, suddenly hanging on against a French team that had found its pride and its firepower. The 4-0 cushion was down to a single goal, and the momentum was entirely with Les Bleus. This is the point where the game tilted on its next big controversy. Because England needed something to settle themselves, and they got it in the most contentious way possible. Late in the game, England pushed forward, and Jude Spence got into the French box. And there, Malo Gusto brought him down. The referee pointed to the spot. Penalty to England. And immediately the debate began. Was it a foul? Was there enough contact? In a match that had already produced 7 goals of pure, defensively optional football, was this really the moment to award a penalty that would kill the French comeback stone dead? For France, having clawed all the way back from 4-0 to 4-3, to then concede a spot kick that pushed the game back out of reach, it felt cruel. It felt like the officials reaching in and slamming the door on one of the great comebacks. But the penalty stood. And now came the human drama on top of the controversy. Because who was going to take it? The obvious assumption, with the game state as it was, might have been to hand it to a senior head. But Jude Bellingham, who had come off the bench, picked up the ball and gave it to Bukayo Saka. Saka was on 2 goals. A penalty here meant a hat trick. And not just any hat trick. A hat trick in a World Cup. An achievement so rare that only a tiny handful of English players had ever managed it in the entire history of the men's tournament. And this is a player who has known what it is to stand over a spot kick with the world watching and the weight of a nation on his shoulders. This was a moment loaded with far more meaning than a simple penalty in a third-place playoff. He placed the ball, he stepped back, and with ice in his veins, he sent the goalkeeper the wrong way and buried it. 5-3. Hat trick. And in a moment that told you everything about the strange, loose, almost friendly atmosphere this game had somehow developed, the goal drew smiles. Bellingham hugged him. Even opponents were seen smiling at the sheer occasion of it. For a match that both managers had tried to cancel, there was a surprising amount of joy breaking out on that pitch. But France were still not finished. Because this game refused, absolutely refused, to settle down. Deep into stoppage time, with the match seemingly done, Ousmane Dembélé produced a moment of quality, a clinical finish to drag France back to within 1 again. 5-4, 10 minutes of chaos compressed into 90, and now, incredibly, France were 1 goal away from completing a comeback for the ages. 4-0 down at half-time and somehow, within touching distance of 5-all. The French bench was up. The comeback was on. 1 more goal, and this would have gone down as perhaps the greatest fightback in World Cup history. And then Jude Bellingham ended it. Just a couple of minutes after Dembélé's goal, Bellingham, the man Tuchel had left on the bench at the start, broke forward and finished off the scoring with a fine individual effort. 6-4. 10 goals, done. And with that goal, Bellingham reached 7 goals for the tournament himself, becoming the first England player to score 7 at a single World Cup. Another record, on a night that had been absolutely overflowing with them. 6-4, the most goals in a World Cup match in over 40 years. A hat trick, a record breaker at the top of the all-time charts, an assist record, an individual English scoring record, a 4-goal collapse, and a near-miraculous comeback that fell just 1 goal short. All in a game that the 2 men in charge had publicly wished did not exist. So let us talk about what it all means. Because underneath the madness and the goals, there are some real stories here, and some real controversies that will linger. The first is Thomas Tuchel and the rotation. Remember, this was a decision that looked before kickoff like a manager waving a white flag. Resting Kane, Bellingham, Pickford. It looked like England were not bothered. And yet that same rotated side raced into a 4-0 lead and finished the job to secure England's best World Cup finish in 60 years. Since 1966. That is not nothing. That is the deepest England have gone at a World Cup in 6 decades. And they did it, in this final match, with a heavily changed team. For Tuchel, it was a small measure of redemption after the brutal criticism of the Argentina defeat. He talked afterwards about wanting a reaction, about talking not getting you points or wins, about the best response being to go and win on the pitch. And his team did exactly that. Whether it papers over the deeper cracks, the tactical questions from the semi-final, the sense that England once again found a way to fall short when it mattered most, that is a debate that will run and run. But on the day, his changes were vindicated, at least on the scoreboard. The second story is the collapse of France and the ending of an era. This was Didier Deschamps' final match. 14 years. A World Cup won in 2018. A final reached in 2022. One of the most successful tenures in the history of international football. And it ended with his near full-strength team 4-0 down at halftime to England's reserves, and finishing outside the top 3 at a tournament where France had one of the most gifted squads they had assembled in years. Deschamps took responsibility, as he always has. He pointed to the fact that they had been 4 goals down and still made a game of it. He did not hide from the result. But it was a painful, chaotic, undignified way for a giant of the French game to sign off. Zinedine Zidane is widely expected to take over. A new era begins. And the Deschamps era, for all its trophies, closed on a scoreline that nobody saw coming. The third story, and maybe the one that will be remembered longest, is Kylian Mbappé. Because for France, for all the pain of the result, their captain walked off that pitch as the leading goal scorer in the history of the World Cup. 2 goals on the night, a place at the very top of the record books, and the argument settled about where he stands among the greatest tournament players the game has ever seen. He did not win the trophy. He may not even have edged the Golden Boot ahead of Messi. But he ended the tournament having climbed higher than anyone before him. In defeat, in a game nobody wanted, he made history. And then there is Bukayo Saka, a hat trick in a World Cup, a penalty converted under pressure in a moment loaded with far more history than the scoreline suggested. He said afterwards that this was a game many players would not have wanted to play, but that he was happy to be out there, happy to get the minutes, happy to enjoy the last game of a World Cup that only comes around every 4 years. And in that attitude, maybe, is the answer to the whole third-place playoff debate. Because here is the thing. 2 managers stood in front of the cameras and said this match should not exist, that nobody wanted to play it, that it was a pointless exercise for 2 heartbroken teams. And then those 2 teams went out and produced 10 goals, a hat trick, multiple records, a stunning collapse, a breathtaking comeback, a contentious penalty, and one of the most purely entertaining games of the entire World Cup. It was absurd. The defending was, at times, almost non-existent. It felt, as more than one observer put it, like a training ground match with the brakes off. A game where both teams decided that if they had to be there, they might as well entertain. And in doing so, they accidentally made the case for the very fixture their managers wanted abolished. Would it have happened if the stakes were higher? Probably not. A tighter, more meaningful game would have been more cautious, more controlled, less open. The very meaninglessness that Tuchel and Deschamps complained about was precisely what made the game so wild. There was no fear. There was freedom. And freedom, in football, produces chaos and goals. So was the third-place playoff a waste of time? The 2 men in charge certainly thought so before kickoff. But ask the fans who watched 10 goals fly in. Ask Bukayo Saka, who got his World Cup hat trick. Ask Kylian Mbappé, who climbed to the top of the all-time list. Ask England, who secured their best finish since 1966. Ask Michael Olise, who set an assist record. The game that nobody wanted turned into a game that nobody who saw it will forget. And perhaps that is the final, delicious irony of the whole thing. In a tournament defined by tension and pressure and the crushing weight of expectation, the most entertaining spectacle of all came from the one match where nobody had anything left to lose. Two teams, stripped of their dreams, playing purely for pride and for the sheer joy of the game. And giving us 10 goals, a fistful of records, and a story that will be told for years. The final, between Spain and Argentina, was the game the world had circled on the calendar. But the third-place playoff, the game nobody asked for, might just have stolen the whole weekend. That is the beauty of football. Sometimes the game you least want to watch is the one that gives you everything. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest matches, the biggest controversies, and the biggest stories in the world of football. Until next time.